Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to tonight's presentation. I'm happy to see so many familiar faces and some new ones as well. Tonight we are joined by Haunted Places explorer Lennon Gross and folklore enthusiast Christine Wray, who will share about their book project researching and exploring the reserve's shadowy side. They'll also be sharing some of their favorite local spots and stories, as well as how you can support their efforts. Reminder, please remain muted during the presentation. You can send any questions you have throughout in the chat. And as always, there will be an opportunity at the end to unmute for a Q&A. If you enjoyed tonight's presentation, make sure to check out our website and register to join us again next week. Without further ado, Christine and Lennon, take it away.
Great, thanks for the nice introduction, Dottie. So tonight we have a PowerPoint we're going to use to guide us. And as Dottie said, we will have time at the end for questions. So if you think of anything, type it in the chat, make a note, what have you. We will also be having the PowerPoint emailed to you after the chat. So if you want to review anything, you'll be able to easily do so. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay. So welcome to Paranormal Poolesville. Tonight's session, we're going to introduce ourselves just to piggyback a little bit off of what Dottie said. We are going to talk about a mysterious photo that kind of sparked off us working together on this project, followed up by a book project, how we came to decide to work on that. We have a call to action for you because we need your help, and then we'll have time for Q&A.
Everybody, my name is Lennon Gross. I was born and raised in Poolesville, Maryland. You guys might have heard of Semi Hollow. Those are my brothers. But currently I am a grad student at Johns Hopkins in the Museum Studies program. But aside from that, one of my biggest interests is all things paranormal and investigating haunted places. And connecting again with my roots and being able to be part of this project has just been such a rewarding experience. But it's nice to meet everyone, for those of you who don't know me, and great to know all of you.
And I'm Christine Wray. I'm a writer, a professor, and a current Poolesville resident. I'm an English professor, but I have a lot of interests and passions. I'm definitely an interdisciplinarian. And one of the things that I really enjoy is exploring local history and folklore. And you may recognize me from the past. I have led the Historic Medley District's Haunted History Walking Tours, which are now restarting this year. And I've also done some spooky bonfire storytelling events out at Soleado Lavender Farm. So I'm really thrilled to be working on this with someone as talented and as fun and capable as Lennon. So let's give you some background. So basically, you may recognize this if you're on the Town of Poolesville Facebook page. A couple years ago, someone had emailed me out of the blue. They said that they were a relative of someone who lives in town, and they were from out of state, and their son was in a soccer tournament at a nearby farm. And before the tournament started, she snapped this photo that you see on the slide. And she didn't really notice anything amiss at the time, didn't really pay attention to that mysterious figure in the tree line. And it wasn't until she got home and started reviewing the photo, she said, hold on, what is that? And so she shared it with her family member that does live here in Poolesville. And they said, oh, well, you should contact the lady that does the haunted history tours. Maybe she will know something. And so I got her permission. I posted the picture on the town page. I asked people, like, what does this look like to you? Do you know anything about the history of this place? You know, not trying to lead people with any kind of theory or anything of my own. And Lennon was one of the people that responded to that. And I didn't put two and two together that Lennon had actually attended the same church as me when we first moved to Poolesville like 14 years ago. So that's how we reconnected. And we actually went on an exploration with another friend, and we went and tried to find this spot. So Lennon, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that exploration.
It was definitely a bonding experience. There is, I think, something very special about haunted places and the intrigue that they share. And as we were going through sort of trying to pinpoint exactly where the photo had been taken, because there was some question as to which field it actually was at, more and more of the history of Poolesville sort of started coming up in the conversation, because we were talking about where the soldiers might have been and how the battle would have gone and where lines would have been drawn and this, that, the third. So what we started noticing is that as we were talking about just the picture of the ghost, the history of Poolesville started coming alive to us in a way that you can't really have unless you're having these discussions of the past and looking in places that people don't normally look, like a polo field.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the cool things about this topic is it encourages a broader swath of people to be engaged with history, to be engaged with local landmarks, or in this case, the local landscape. So I think no matter what you believe about ghosts or the supernatural or the spiritual, even if for you at the end of the day, it's just a cool story, I think that that's something that's so compelling about this topic to me, especially as an educator. I'm passionate about learning new things and teaching them to people. So it makes me super happy when I see people getting curious and getting out there, explore and wanting to find out more. And this is a little corny, but I like this quote from Jacques Cousteau. He says, "We protect what we love." And so for me, part of this project is not only exploring these stories and the history, but it's also kind of a love letter to the Ag Reserve. And we hope that through this work, more people can come to see the beauty and the value of the Ag Reserve's natural resources, as well as its history. And they'll see it as something to be valued and protected.
One of the things also that we have been talking about very much with this project is the fact that there's so much of the Ag Reserve that isn't broadcasted. There's so much history, there's so many different facets and nuances, and we hope to bring a lot of that to life. As she was saying, a love letter to the Ag Reserve.
Kind of spooky love letter, but a love letter nonetheless. So shortly after this exploration that we had done based on this photo, this funny reconnection that we had, I had been talking to someone at a local farm near Sugarloaf Mountain, and this person had shared with me in the past that the farm had a history of some really interesting supernatural, paranormal, whatever adjective you'd like to apply to it, events, including, ghosts, seeing Civil War soldiers, seeing what appeared to be a Native American woman with long black hair and a baby on her back appear in a photograph where it was a clear day and there was nothing like that nearby, as well as some other sort of strange circumstances around the house and the farm itself, which I won't give too much detail about due to their privacy. But I had told the people at this farm about Lennon and the work that we were doing. And so they invited us out to come and have a look. So we walked around the farm, we checked out some of these sites, we heard the farm owner's stories. And at the end of that day, when we were getting ready to leave, I stopped and just kind of spur of the moment, I said, "Hey, I've been wanting to write a book about this stuff. Would you like to write it with me?" And Lennon was like, "I would love to write a book like that with you." And so that's kind of how the collaboration started, because especially people with, I think, the historic Medley district walking tours, they were like, "You should write a book about this. That would be great." And so, taking someone's advice years later and actually starting this journey. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Lennon.
That's a pretty good summary of what happened. I will say it was sort of like a literary nerd's Christmas when you said that, because it always has been a dream of mine to write about specifically this topic. And so to have just the opportunity to be able to do that with someone as talented as Christine, but also about home is a phenomenal adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. So our project, Lennon, why don't you talk about this? Because I've done a lot of talking. I don't want to be a mic hog here.
Not at all. She is the educator. I am definitely a behind the scenes person. I will not lie, but currently we're in the research phase. And part of that is conducting interviews, gathering stories, as well as diving through the history books and getting some of the historical record to try to piece together where some of these stories might have come from. So we, yes. Did you have
Can I add something real quick? I should say too that we've been doing site visits. In fact, this last weekend, Lennon and I went down to Haunted House Bend along the C&O Canal. There's no house there and never has been, but in between basically Edwards Ferry and White's Ferry is a stretch of canal that for years since the Civil War has been said to be particularly haunted. And so we went down there over the weekend and checked it out. So we're really trying to use all these different inputs to inform our research. And I can show you real quick some of the books that we're dealing with. Here's a really great book. It's In Search of Maryland Ghosts, Montgomery County. And there is a decent sized section in here on Poolesville. So if you like reading spooky stories, this is a great one. It's from a couple Montgomery County historians. You can get it at your local bookstore as well as online. That's a really good one. Then as well as some others that don't specifically deal with Poolesville or even Montgomery County, but just to look at the writing style, to look at what kind of details we could include, what kind of resources are helpful and engaging as a reader. So this was a really good one for folklore, Spooky Maryland. And this has a lot of great stories. Spooky folklore from across the state, including some of my favorites from the Eastern Shore, like Big Liz, which is a great revenge story from beyond the grave. And this is written, or she says, retold by S.E. Slosser. So that's a good one. And then more folklore specific Maryland legends. This is a good one coming out of the University of Maryland College Park's folklore program. It's not all really scary. It's a little academic, but it's really well done. It includes some of the stories of Black Aggie. You may have heard of the haunted tombstone that used to be in a Baltimore area cemetery, as well as some other ones from around the state. The last one, which Len and I will get more into it when we ask for your help. It's definitely not scary. It's this funky coffee table book called Weird Maryland. And this actually has Black Aggie on the cover. But, you know, beyond just haunted houses, spooky places, but we're also willing to and want to hear stories of, you know, strange creatures, possible UFO sightings, basically anything funky, strange, inexplicable, or offbeat, including urban legends.
And legends.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we're currently doing as well is gathering interviews from firsthand accounts. But it is important to know that you don't have to have a firsthand story to be able to share the information with us. Even if it is a secondhand story or just something that you heard around the campfire, that could give us leads to go and track down more people and get more stories somewhere else. So even if you think, oh, they probably know about this, or even if it's not something you have firsthand knowledge of, please be sure to share it with us anyway, because chances are it might lead us to somewhere new. That being said, the ultimate goal is to compile all of these stories and all of this information into a bit of a narrative that talks about the history of the agricultural reserve and some of the weird and crazy things about it that makes it so worth preserving. And we are also in the middle of sort of considering a podcast, as some of these interviews that we're doing have been recorded, and we have these stories that we want to be able to share with you guys firsthand as well. And so that's something that's in the works as this project develops, as sort of a side project to, because not every story can make it into the book, obviously. And there's so much that we're being told, and there's so much that we're being helped with. And we want to spotlight all of these stories as best as we can, and a podcast is a really good way to do that. Um, that being said, please keep it coming because we really do need all of your help to make this a reality.
Mhm. Absolutely. So I'm just checking our time. We're doing great. So like Lennon just said, so call to action, we need your help. So how can you help? Spreading the word to locals, especially people who may not be on social media or even people that have moved away. Like Lennon says, it doesn't have to be a firsthand story. It could just be something you heard, something that happened to a friend or a relative. And it could even be an old story. It could be like, hey, like 40 years ago, when I was in high school, I remember this weird thing happened. We are happy to hear those as well. We also have a Facebook group, Mysteries and Legends of the Ag Reserve. It's the same as this title here in this black bar. You can join the group and there's contact information on there, how you can email us or refer people to us if they want to share a story. So our email is on that Facebook page. It's also here on this flyer, on this image here. And when the PowerPoint from tonight is emailed to you, we'll also email this flyer to you. So you'll have it handy. And so speaking of flyers, if you are so motivated, if you print out some copies of the flyer and you hang them maybe somewhere where people would see them and it would get their attention, any and all of these things we would deeply appreciate because we want this to be a community project. Because the Ag Reserve is not an empty place. We want to tell stories of people that live here now, and we also want to tell stories of people past. And in order to do that, it very much has to be a community experience, for sure. So this
that way.
we spent through this. We're not done yet. So maybe I should go back one slide and we can stay there for a minute and we can talk about some things. So one of the things that Lennon and I in particular want to do with this project is to make sure that we're trying to get inclusive voices from the Ag Reserve. So, you know, that Montgomery County's Ag Reserve was originally lived in by Native Americans, primarily the Piscataway tribe. And between White's Ferry and Riley's Lock on the C&O Canal are, and then if you add in the islands in the Potomac, I think there's about 6 or 7 different prehistoric, pre-contact Native American villages along there. So we are also part of our research going to be looking into their belief systems, looking into that culture, which is a challenge because it is prehistoric. And so a lot of it has to be sort of ascertained in some interesting ways. We also are really interested in highlighting the African-American history in the Ag Reserve. One of the unique things about this area is, you know, post-Civil War, we had a lot of these African-American communities pop up around the Ag Reserve. And these communities, of course, have their own rich and vibrant history and have their own rich and vibrant folklore as well. So we're really trying to cast a wide net to get like a really complete picture of who currently lives in the Ag Reserve and who has lived in the Ag Reserve in the past. And we're really excited about that. One thing that we do want to do tonight, we do want to share some stories with you all. And I know I also have a wish list of specific places and topics that I especially want to hear from people more about. So Lennon, what do you think? Do you want to talk about the wish list first, or would you like to talk about some of our stories or some of our favorites first?
I say wish list first, you know, like we'll do the work and then we'll get to the fun part.
That's good. You can have your dessert after you eat your dinner, right?
Everyone get out your pens, write this down.
Yeah. Feel free to take some notes. So do you want me to go with my wish list first, or would you like to go?
You have the floor.
Okay. So I'm open to everything, obviously, but I have a big 3 that I'm asking the Ag Reserve Santa more information about. The first thing is McKee-Beshers. So as you know, or must know if you live here, McKee-Beshers is many, many acres. It's a wildlife management area. It borders the Potomac River and the C&O Canal. Most people know it because of the beautiful sunflower fields that are planted each year, and then all the people that come visit and post on Instagram. But of course, McKee-Besher is more than that. People go there to hunt, they go there to fish, they go there to hike, bird watching, I mean, on and on and on. It's also a very wild area. And it's also an area that has served as hunting quarters for many, many years, originally for Native Americans. And then later, very early on in Montgomery County's settlement, it was Brightwell's hunting quarters. And so this area has been farmed and has been used as a hunting ground for many years. Plus, it's so huge and so wild. I just know people have seen some weird stuff out there. So keep your ears open. If anybody shares a strange McKee-Besher story, please give them our email or the name of our Facebook group. The second one that I'm really interested in is if you go to the intersection of 107 headed out of town, this is technically Dawsonville, it's not Poolesville, and 28, there is a stop sign right there, not the greatest intersection in the world. If you're at the stop sign and you look to your right, you will see this beautiful old stone house, the Seneca red sandstone that's so much a marker of this particular place. I noticed this house when I first moved here years ago. I kept looking at it when I would stop at the stop sign because I love old houses. And I thought, this is a beautiful house. Why is no one living in it? Then I got a little nosy. I lived in Baltimore for 10 years. So I'm like, maybe there's something wrong with it. No, I don't see any broken windows. The roof doesn't look like it's caved in. Yeah, I thought it was like, a vacant property. And so it started to really get in my mind, like, what's up with this house? It's gorgeous. And so when I originally was starting to do the haunted history tours for the Historic Medley District, I put out a call on the town's Facebook page, and somebody had said that house at 107 and 28 is super haunted, and the ghost that's in there is so scary that people won't even stay in the house. Like, they can't even rent the house out. And a number of people chimed in and they're like, yes, I've heard that too, that whatever that ghost does is so just nerve rattling, no one will live there. So, but I haven't got any specific details of what exactly this ghost does. I've also heard some interesting information from people about this house, that there is some kind of stone tunnel in the basement that supposedly leads out to the bluffs on Seneca Creek State Park right there. Somebody else said that they had heard that that tunnel under the house was originally a Underground Railroad escape route, which would check out. Underground Railroad being secret and Poolesville kind of being a hotbed of secessionist sympathy, it was a very dangerous place for an escaped slave person to be. And they're not going to leave a record. However, we do know for the Underground Railroad that both the C&O Canal was a major escape route, as well as bodies of water. So the Seneca Creek being right there, running into the Potomac River, that could ostensibly have been an escape route at one time. So we're looking for any information, even if it's just hearsay, or a story you heard from someone about that particular house. And it's a beautiful house. Definitely. Check it out the next time you drive by, but please be careful. It is a dangerous intersection for sure. And then my third wish list item is more of an urban legend. Those of you that live in this area may know, outside of town, we have the NIH Animal Farm. And I remember when I first moved here, my husband grew up in Poolesville, and he's driving me around through the country, and he's like, this is the NIH farm. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, it has its own water tower? Why are these barbed wire fences like pointing in like something's going to escape out? I grew up in Frederick, and so we had all kinds of urban legends in Frederick County around Fort Detrick. And so of course I started thinking, what's going on at this animal farm? And so I have heard a couple stories about the NIH farm, sort of urban legend stuff. I had a student at Frederick Community College where I teach, years ago who had been a security guard at the NIH farm. And he told me some of the old timers that had worked there for a while told him to be careful because there was an escaped failed experiment on the loose that was known to attack people. And then I had a local actually tell me a couple weeks ago that the NIH farm supposedly has something called hennies. And these hennies are half man, half ape. And they have really long arms and they're known to scream in a really blood-curdling fashion that's terrifying. So that's my third wish list item. So if you hear any of these wild stories about the NIH farm, we would love to have them as well as anything else. Anything else, Lennon?
I definitely have a few items of my own to kick around for you guys real quick. The first being that some of these properties, you know, the ones we all know, which when you go down the street in Poolesville, you're like, oh, that house is haunted. That house is haunted. If you know of a property that's super haunted and you know the people who live there or own it, if you could get us in contact with those people, that would be awesome, because you know who wants to stay the night in the creepy 10728 house? Me, very much so. That's the one thing. The other thing for me is that growing up here, I heard a lot of stories about the Underground Railroad and the C&O Canal, but also specifically White's Ferry. And when we look in a lot of the history books today, White's Ferry isn't often mentioned or at all mentioned in conjunction with the Underground Railroad. However, doing some circumstantial research about the ferry, one of the things that I learned was that giant fruit carts used to come across, and those fruit carts could hold a lot of things, including people. And I personally, in this project, would like to sort of prove what I'd been told as a kid, that Poolesville was a hub for the Underground Railroad, and houses like the 10728 house might be able to help to substantiate some of those things that we've been reading and hearing about. But I really would like to sort of change the narrative about White's Ferry, because so much of it talks about the Civil War and how the Union was defeated at the Battle of Ball's Bluff. And I think that it would be really special to be able to reclaim some of that narrative to talk about some of the really cool things about our town that have been swept under the rug. Then the last thing on my wish list is about some of the cemeteries in and around the Ag Reserve, because driving around some of the cemeteries and hanging out there probably more than one should. One of the things that I've noticed is that some of them are not in the best condition. We actually visited a cemetery that's been almost entirely overrun, and Christine can probably talk more on that. But I would like to, in the course of this project, get to know the cemeteries of the Ag Reserve a little bit better, get to know kind of who's there, and also what we can be doing to sustain these places where people have been laid to rest. And so those would be my big three.
Yeah, I echo all of those, especially the last part, you know, again, going back to Monsieur Cousteau's quote about, you know, protecting what you value, letting it be a call to action. You know, I like to think that history isn't just a noun. The history is a verb. It's something that we can be immersed in. It's something that we can be involved in and interact with, and something that we should be good stewards of, right? And I think, again, this particular topic can bring in more people, and together we can help tell all these various stories, as well as, you know, preserve the Ag Reserve, particularly some of its more forgotten corners, and maybe some of the people that have in the past been overlooked or even disrespected. So that's definitely a really cool part about this project that we're both really excited for. So I think we could tell a couple of our favorite stories, and then we can open it for questions and comments. So I think we can both take about a little over 5 minutes if I'm going to be the timekeeper. Do you want to go first, Lennon?
Certainly. I do have a few stories to tell. So the first story is one that I heard through the Facebook network in conjunction with that image that we showed you at the beginning of the presentation. And also a while back, I had posted on the Town of Poolesville page that I was involved with a ghost hunting expedition group. So I got a lot of stories through that. That group is unfortunately disbanded. However, it sort of led into this project as well, so silver linings. However, one of the stories that I received was about the sod farm leaving town once again on 107. The story goes that a woman was out there, just around dusk, just getting dark outside, and it was not a very windy day by any stretch of the imagination. The trees aren't moving, everything's calm. And then all of a sudden, the gate about 5 feet away from her just starts shaking, as if someone grabbed a hold of it and was just violently shaking this gate. And this is actually a story that I've had sent to me maybe 2 or 3 times because it rattled the woman so much. I got it rattled. But it rattled her so much because it's this, clear, non-windy night, and all of a sudden, everything's just shaking. And so it's hard sometimes when it comes to open fields to sort of pin down what might be going on there. But a lot of people don't report these stories because they think of it as a one-off, or they think no one would believe them. But if maybe someone on this call has seen a gate shaking at the sod farm, then suddenly it's substantiated. That said, also, there was an interview that I conducted a couple of weeks back, and I'm not going to share the names of the people who've conducted interviews, but the story goes that out on West Old Baltimore Road, there is a figure of a man who was cut in half by a farm incident, and you can see his bottom half roaming about the road. So the way that this went was that the man was driving down the road, and he saw, sort of parallel to him, a figure with no torso, as if it were like riding on some sort of farm equipment. And it was just the bottom half, clear as day for just a moment. And then all of a sudden it was gone before his very eyes. And so I feel like a lot of people have these kind of stories where they've seen something just sort of strange and they're not quite sure what to make of it. And then the last thing that I will tell you is a story of my own. One time driving back from White's Ferry with a friend, because she and I are both very interested in the haunted places. I had taken her out there and we just sort of did the loop and we're coming back on the same road. And as we were driving along, about 10 feet in front of the car, I looked up and saw what appeared to be a man walking down the road right in front of me. White shirt, sort of cut off, like corduroy pants almost, suspenders that crossed on his back. And he appeared there, and it was so real that I tried to, turn the car until I realized, oh, that's not really a person there. And it appeared so close to the car that there was not really much moving to be done, but I didn't say anything as this happened because my friend wasn't seeing it. And so as the car passed, she goes straight up, sitting up in her seat. And she's like, what was that? Because where we drove, she passed right through.
Oh no.
And this, like I took the car wheel, and luckily there was nobody else on the road. And I was like, oh no. But then it sort of occurred to me, like, this is not a real person, as it blinked out of existence right before the car went through. So very interesting stories in the Ag Reserve.
This is why I'm going to do all the driving, Lennon. I don't want
Right, exactly.
I don't want to go through a ghost. Oh. That makes me just feel cold hearing about it. So yeah, real quick, I'll share a few of mine. to piggyback off of what Lennon said earlier about the shaken gate and things that are quick, you may think, this isn't a real story. It's just a weird little thing. We'd still love to hear it because one little weird little thing is interesting for sure. But when more people have similar experiences in the same spot, then it becomes a pattern, right? And for example, I had something strange happen to me last year that was a quick thing, not enough to be a story, but I'm curious about the history behind it and if other people have had this experience. I was driving with my husband. I was the passenger on, oh no, I can't think of the road. It's that side road that goes, it borders along the Isaac Walton League, not Cub Hollow Road, down that way though. But we were driving, we were headed back north toward town. I had a headache. We had stopped at Dunkin' Donuts and gotten coffee and just gone for, a drive around the country, just listening to music. And so I was just kind of looking out the window at the woods. It's like winter time, so there's no, trees, there's no foliage in the way. All the wild vines hadn't grown up yet. And as I'm glancing through the woods, all of a sudden I just see flash up for just a second what I could only describe as a ghost house. So it was a gray house, kind of like weathered wood, like old wood, in the same architectural style that we see a lot of here in the Ag Reserve, right? Like that frame farmhouse with like the point at the top. It was like that. And I leaned for it, I blinked, and it was gone. And I've since driven by that site a few more times and have not yet seen it again. So I'm curious, like, I wonder, was there a farm at that site? Have other people experienced this? So I'd be curious about that. But as far as my favorite stories that I've heard thus far, it's hard to pin down because there's so many really, really cool and some, frankly, really scary for me stories. But one that I like that's really short, but literally sweet, which was shared with me on Facebook when I was doing my initial research for the Historic Medley Tour. Someone used to live in the Camelier House down on your way to White's Ferry. So as you're going toward White's Ferry from town and you have Annington up on the hill to your right, you go around that curve, there's like a white farmhouse kind of close to the road. They have like an old, weather vane thing up there. They used to live in that house. And she used to say when she was a kid, on Sunday mornings, they could hear gospel music singing coming from the back fields. And there's nothing around there. There's no other houses. There's not a church nearby. There's no one blasting gospel music, vocal gospel music at that time of morning. So I thought that was a really cool and beautiful, though brief story. That's definitely a slice of the Ag Reserve. If you think about the historical past and the people who have been working in many of the fields. The one that I like, and I can't give you a lot of details because I definitely want to give you time to ask questions and to share as well, is one that is, like Lennon said, piecing together a pattern of, hold on, what did I just see? And this is a guy I like to refer to as the Watcher. And so I first heard about him when my husband and I started dating about 16, 17 years ago. Somehow we got to talking about like strange things that had happened to us. And he said, well, when I was a kid in high school one summer, I was out riding my bike with a friend out in the country, just down the country roads. End of summer, you're in high school, you start to get bored, not old enough to have a license yet. There's no internet. And so they were driving around and they ended up right at that intersection at Sugarland Road where the church is. And he said he and his friend stopped in the road. There's no traffic. And so they started discussing, should we go back? Do we want to keep going? And when they looked ahead, there was a dog standing in the road. And they're like, where did this dog come from? And they looked at the dog and it looked strange. He said it looked like an old German Shepherd, like it had a gray muzzle. It had muddy paws and like its eyes were like whited out, like it had cataracts or it had gone blind. And they're like, this dog doesn't look well. And we're out in the middle of nowhere. Like, what are we going to do? And then when they look back, the dog had vanished. There was a man standing in his place. And the man was an older African-American man. He had close cropped gray hair. He was wearing faded work clothes, no shoes, muddy feet, and whited out eyes. And I was like, how did you not have a heart attack and die? And so he said, yeah, we both got out of there and they were so freaked out, like they never talked about it. You know, the emotional depth of teenage boys, I suppose. But I shared that story later on. Hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself. I never shared that story to anyone. And then years later, we had moved to Poolesville. We were at a friend's house, a friend who lives off of Jerusalem Road. And we got to talking after dinner outside in the woods, in the dark, about spooky stuff. And my friend says, well, you know, I had this weird thing happen to me. I don't have time to give you all the details, but she goes on to explain this man who appeared in a misty field. And guess what he looked like? He was an older African-American man, faded work clothes, whited out eyes, close cropped gray hair. And when we went to go see this misty field that she saw him in, it was a forest with big, fully grown trees. And she was seriously freaked out. It was then I got her permission to share the story when I did some of the bonfire storytelling stuff. And more people since then have come up to me and said, we've seen him too, standing in fields and appearing. And in fact, our neighbors, our former neighbors, also told us that the wife out of that family had seen this man as well. So we're looking for these types of patterns and these types of stories, which are, you know, unique to the Ag Reserve. So I'm gonna go forward because I'm tired of looking at this slide. Before we get ahead of ourselves, just again saying thank you. A few things that you could choose to participate in if you like. This weekend in Poolesville at Locals Market, we will be there from open to close with a table set up. You can come and meet us. You can ask us questions. If you have a story you would like to share, we'll kind of just be doing drop-ins, and then from 11 to noon, we'll actually be on the mic. So we'll be doing something a little similar to what we're doing tonight, introducing ourselves, sharing some stories, and sort of doing a call to action. So come on by. If you haven't checked out Locals yet, it's the best place in town for sure. Particularly if you're a history buff, it's really in the heart of historical Poolesville. And then lastly, to benefit the Historic Medley District, I'm going to be leading, after a COVID hiatus, our Haunted History Walking Tour. I did notice somebody in the chat message me about tickets. I don't do anything with the tickets. I'm sorry, I don't even know how many people have signed up. I just show up and do the tour. But if you contact the folks at Historic Medley, there may be a waiting list or something like that that they could put you on. So some things if you enjoy this topic. And again, we appreciate your help and your time and attention. So I'm going to stop sharing. And we'll open it for questions. Dottie, I don't know if you want to share any questions that have been in the chat and get it going.
Yeah, so everyone go ahead and send questions in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask them. I did see one that said, can we put up a list of books mentioned? So Melissa put some of those in the chat for you, but I'm sure also we can include that in the material that we'll email you after the presentation.
Oh yeah.
And
I also appreciate.
Yeah, go ahead.
I also appreciate those of you who have been sort of messaging me on the side some leads. That's been very helpful. I've been writing them down. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
I also think it would be worth mentioning, I saw Glenn Wallace was on tonight, not to call you out, Glenn, but he knows really a lot about our local cemeteries and the history behind them and does a lot of work with their preservation. So if you haven't met him yet, that'd be a great connection, I think.
Oh yeah, Glenn Wallace is a treasure, for sure. He does a lot of great work.
I see a question in the chat that says, have you heard any weird stories regarding Seneca's Schoolhouse?
As a matter of fact, yes, I have. My mom was actually she was a school marm at the Seneca Schoolhouse one year, and you know, she was supposed to sign up for like the whole summer or however many weeks they did it, and she spent one day in the schoolhouse and said that the feelings that she got were so uncomfortable that she had to excuse herself from the assignment because it was just that uncomfortable for her. That said, I will tell you a story that I had experienced at the Seneca Schoolhouse if you would like to hear it. It is a little creepy though. I was there one time sort of casing the joint with my dad actually, and as we were walking around, there was a thump on the window, and I kind of it's a creepy place, especially winter as it was. All the trees are dead, very spooky. But as we came around, on the ground in front of the schoolhouse was a bright red cardinal that had flown into the window. And it happened as soon as we stepped onto the property. So very spooky sort of environment there.
Yeah, that's not inviting timing. It's going up somewhere.
That's always what you want to see when you drive up to a place,
I see another question that says, do you guys do any, I'm guessing, investigating at night with flashlights?
We have not yet. However, if you or someone that you know would like to give us access to the properties, we would love to do some investigating at night with flashlights and like maybe an EMF or two. Who's to say?
I also see one that says, didn't the Monocacy Monocle run a story about the history of the house in the corner of 107 and 28?
Yeah, Kenny Scholes not too long ago visited that property and did a really great write-up on it. It's a beautiful property. And in fact, if I remember correctly, there's a nice write-up on some of the architectural features of that house and some of the other outbuildings there I think it was a Maryland Historical Trust application, either for that property or for Dawsonville as a whole. I can't remember which. So if you're an architecture and history buff, you could definitely look that up. It's a beautiful house for sure.
And Shannon comments, I sent Lennon some photos via Facebook Messenger that were taken there. Would be interested to know what you think. Parentheses, faces and windows. Very intriguing.
Thank you for that. I didn't mention when I was talking about my wish list, we are trying to be sensitive and not sensational with this project. So when we're telling these stories, obviously some of them are creepy and are a little more woo than others. But we also want to be mindful of the fact that these were real people at one time, right? Even though now they may just be a name in a history book or a name on a stone somewhere, they were someone's family. And in the case of people who have lived in this area for many years, they're still someone's family, even if they're many generations removed. And so this is a little bit sensitive, I suppose, because of that circumstance. But that house was the site of an axe murder years and years ago in the early, I want to say like 1907, somewhere around then. One of the residents at that time murdered his mother, and I want to say badly injured his sister and the housekeeper with an axe handle. And so some people that are interested in theories behind paranormal activity may say that, that's a very angry and violent spirit, and that's kind of why it's still rooted in that place. That is, I should say, one thing that we're not trying to do with this project is promote any particular theory or reasoning behind it. We just want to present the stories and let you make up your mind about how you want to receive them per your own belief system.
And again,
another question.
Even
Go
if
ahead.
It's like a campfire story, at least you're talking about the history of the Ag Reserve.
That's right.
I see one that says, have you heard of any paranormal activity on Montevideo Road or associated residents there?
Not yet, but that end of Montevideo Road comes out there in Dawsonville, and there is a house. Let's see, if you're coming out from Rockland's Farm area, like out toward, I guess, headed east, and then you make the right to go to this axe murder house we were just talking about. I really don't want to call it that. That would be unfortunate because it is a beautiful house, the beautiful stone house that is currently vacant. The house that's prior to that, the stone house that's close to the road, next to the church driveway, that house is supposedly haunted by a former resident that had it built. So that's the only one that I've heard of, and that's not even on Montevideo Road proper. But we would love to hear more because, you know, that part of the Ag Reserve does have some really beautiful historic houses and some history behind it.
Donna comments, I went to Seneca Schoolhouse with my girls many years ago. We opened the door and saw an adult and students in colonial garb. We slammed the door shut. When we looked later, the room was empty. No school bus or any other cars around.
I have a question, a follow-up question. Can I interview you? Please and thank you.
Donna, would you like to answer a question?
Hi, I'm Donna.
Hi, Donna. Nice to
Hi.
meet you.
Did you want to ask me now or you want me to write it in the chat?
If possible, can you actually write it into the email, the MLAR contact us at gmail.com, because
Okay.
what I would love to do is set up a time outside of this that we can sit
Sure,
down and
okay.
go through the entire experience.
Right, okay. It's not really anything real concrete. It's just, I mean, at the time it was just spooky and unexplainable, and we just kind of, like you said, you just kind of put it off and until somebody brings it up later and it's like, oh yeah, I remember when that happened. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah. You can always stop by locals this weekend too. get a cup of coffee, something tasty, and you can tell us your story.
Okay.
Yeah, very cool. Thanks for sharing, Donna. I also see a comment from Courtney that the photos of the faces in the windows were of the Seneca Schoolhouse and not the stone house. Any other questions at this point? Feel free to unmute or turn on your camera and share either a question or any experience that you've had. I see a question said, have you heard of any stories involving Trundle Road or Trundle Hall located on Trundle Road?
Okay, so I don't know what Trundle Hall is, but speaking of Trundles, the former Trundle farm, I believe, which was Huntsview, now the name is Palmervale on Falls Road. There are quite a few stories about that particular property. Courtney, where would this Trundle Hall be on Trundle Road? If you could give a little more detail about it.
Yeah, hi. Okay, I live on Trundle Road, and actually the dead end of Trundle Road, it dead ends, the driveway goes up to Trundle Hall, which is the main house of what used to be a very, very large farm that's been parceled off, but it's still several hundred acres even today, right? Yeah.
250 plus.
Yeah, it's over 200-acre farm, but back in the day it was way, way larger. And I just know that the resident who I'm friends with, she calls it Trundle Hall, and it's a very old place.
Haven't heard anything yet, but we would love to hear if anyone has heard of any stories. And we should say too that something about these stories and these occurrences, it's not always permanent. So like, for example, on my ghost, haunted history tour I do for the Historic Medley folks, we pass through the main street of town, and one of the properties that I talk about that has a lot of stories is the Hall Nestle House, that beautiful blue house with the red roof. The current owners had contacted me via email, and they let me know, like, we don't have anything weird going on right now. So sometimes these things can happen at a specific time and place, and then they're gone. Or sometimes, some people are sensitive to these things and some people aren't. So that's something else. I think with this project, we're not making any claims that like, hey, this house is forever haunted, and everybody, is going to see a ghost or have something weird happen to them, because that's just not how these things work, apparently. But we're open to stories past and present for sure.
And just because something sort of stops doesn't mean it won't start up again. I've heard stories of houses that activity has been insane. And then depending on who lives there, and oftentimes how much you respect that you show the property and who came before you, sometimes it'll die down again, and then sometimes it'll, pick up again too. So she's very right in saying not everything's permanent when it comes to the other side.
So I have a quick question. Do you have any stories or heard anything from people about within our communities? Like I live in the Westerly subdivision. We're talking about more of outskirts, these larger properties, but I think there's things that go on. Maybe people don't pay as much attention because they think they're so minor, or that's just a coincidence, but have you heard any stories about within the communities themselves?
So I have a couple that I can say real quick, and I'm sure Lennon will add on too. So in the center of town is the old Methodist church, was the former site of the thrift store. There are a lot of stories associated with not only that building, but that area behind it. Which was formerly a cemetery, and I would argue is still a cemetery because there are still bodies resting in it. And so there have been a lot of stories of that particular area in the center of town. And then also, I want to say it was that post Lennon had put on Facebook when she was still when they were still in their ghost hunting group. Somebody was looking at one of the new model homes right there near Westerly that's on West Willard Road. Do you remember that, Lennon?
I have heard before stories of the new model homes and also the model home trailer itself. People said was very creepy, the trailer in front of the development.
Somebody had emailed us a photo. He had gone to, I think, one of the model homes there at that new community that's being built. And it was just he and the real estate agent, no one else. And he was taking some photos of the house to send on to his wife who couldn't attend. And he took a photo in the bathroom with the glass door for the shower. And reflected in that glass door was clearly a figure. And he said there was no one else in there. He's like, I wasn't wearing anything that looked like that. The real estate agent wasn't. There's no artwork that could be reflected. And these pictures are all taken on phones now. So it's not like in the past where it could be some kind of glitch with your film or loading. So that, for example, is one of the newer stories that we've heard. So certainly we're open to, stories from anywhere. It doesn't have to be only a historic site or only, an old house, for sure.
And especially just because a home is new doesn't mean the land is. So you could have we've probably all seen Poltergeist, not that we should be basing anything off of that movie, but it does go to show that you never know kind of what you're resting on, if that makes any sense. And so it's very important that even if you are in a new home or a new development, to remember where you are and where you've come from. Matt Quinn, yes, that is exactly what happened. And we have a case of that right here in our own town of Poolesville, Maryland, with the Methodist Cemetery. That being said as well, Poolesville High School is, in my own experience as well, extraordinarily haunted. So for those of you who might be Poolesville alum or who might know somebody who's still going to Poolesville, if you have any stories of the high school or surrounding areas, that would be phenomenal as well.
And that's a good point, Matt, too. You wonder, when they tear down the old high school and they're building the new one, what will happen to all of that activity? Will it relocate into the new building? Will it, no pun intended, die down? Who knows? And this leads me to another one, the Poolesville Golf Course. the old lodge there. So many people have shared stories in the past with me about seeing the former owner, Bernie, in the lodge, basically playing a lot of pranks on people, in many cases, still wanting to hang out and socialize at his lodge after his death. And so this is another thing of the book and preserving these stories, because they're going to knock down that lodge and they're going to build, yes, a new beautiful building with all of these facilities, but what's going to happen to those stories and what's going to happen to those experiences? So that's something else we're trying to do with this project, is to curate and to collect these stories, because things do change, communities do evolve, and the physical landscape as well as the built landscape evolves as well. So it's a good way to hang on to those stories. So if anybody has any Bernie stories from the lodge, we would love to hear them, definitely.
Additionally, once again, so many of you have been messaging us individually to give us leads or let us know some activity in an area. This chat does disappear and we won't have it on record. So if you could please send everything to that mlarcontactus@gmail.com. That would be so amazingly helpful, so that we can all have it in one place consecutively, and so that we can keep all the threads together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we will be emailing you some of the material from this presentation, and I will include their email address in that email as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you think of something at a later date.
Great.
And I also have something that isn't something I experienced firsthand, but I guess a little bit of folklore I remembered as we were talking. I actually went to Monocacy Elementary School, which is kind of just outside of Poolesville and Barnesville. And I just remember hearing kind of folklore about, there's an old lunch bell by the recess yard, and that people would say would ring on its own, and they would see soldiers in the field back there. So not something I experienced firsthand, but definitely a common bit of folklore from Monocacy.
Very cool.
Yeah, thank you. And definitely we want to hear from all the communities in the Ag Reserve, not just Poolesville. So definitely, Barnesville, Bellsville, Boyd's, other ones that don't start with B, please send them our way. We would really appreciate it.
And just another big thank you to all of you guys for spending the time with us, coming out to listen to what we have to say. We sincerely appreciate it. This has been a phenomenal, allow me to speak for both of us when I say this has been a phenomenal experience.
Do we have any last questions? Feel free to send in the chat or unmute. If not, I would just like to say, I hope you all enjoyed tonight's presentation and learned something new. I really enjoyed it. Speaking for myself, I think it was so fascinating, not only hearing from you guys, but also hearing all the stories just in the chat and from people sharing. That was really neat and such a unique presentation. Of course, if you think of any questions later, you can email them at the email in the chat, or if you can't find that, email info@poolesvilleseniors.org and we can pass it on for you. If you'd like to unmute or turn on your camera to say goodbye, now is the time. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, please leave a like and a comment. Feel free to comment there if you found anything interesting or have an experience of your own to share. We'd like to thank Christine and Lennon for this presentation, as well as our ongoing sponsors and contributors who help us keep our programs going, because we love putting them on for you. If you enjoyed tonight's program, please consider joining us for more upcoming events. This time next week, like I mentioned, we'll be back with Kenny Scholl's October Historic Property Lecture. You can find all of that info at our website, poolesvilleseniors.org, for registration. Thank you all so much for joining us and attending. I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thank you
Bye,
very much.
everyone. Good night.